Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Porter Anderson from Publishing Perspectives. I'm very excited about the session we have this morning for you. We're talking to four terrific people about various aspects of audiobooks and their impact on the industry, what they mean in publishing, what they may mean in publishing going forward, and what you should think about how they mean in your career and in your life and in your business, and even among your friends, even among the consumers you know, and how they're behaving and responding to this format. Within the digital world, as you may know, audiobooks have become very exciting, not least because they are the growth point. In the United States, which is probably the largest audiobook market, we have double-digit growth every quarter, and this has continued for several years. I should point out that audiobooks, however, even in that large a market, are roughly between 8 and 11% of the market. And so they have not gotten to a point where they are really pushing other formats out as much as we might see in the future, but they are growing and growing and growing, and for many interesting reasons as to how they fit into the lives of our consumers, how they fit into the needs of our consumers, and what they're doing for the business itself. So I'm going to start by asking each of our good folks here to tell you a little bit about themselves, and then each of them will talk to us about their various standpoints on this, and we'll have a great discussion. Nathan, may we start with you? Say hello and tell us about yourself.
Good morning. My name is Nathan Hull. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at a company called Beat Technology. I'm currently speaking to you from London, but my company is from Bergen on the coast of Norway. And we build bespoke audiobook subscription and retail platforms for publishers to have that direct engagement with listeners themselves.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Vidal, speak to us from Frankfurt, I think, yes?
I'm actually in London.
You're in London.
Yeah, I'm in London, so similar accent to Nathan, maybe, but I'm the global head of audio for Bookwire, and Bookwire is located
in Frankfurt, which is why I keep placing you there. Yes.
And but I usually would have spent time in Frankfurt under different conditions. But Bookwire is a distributor and a digital service provider for publishers, and audiobooks is really the biggest and fastest growing part of our business. And we offer, distribution solutions, but a whole array of other things, including, marketing, production, analytics, but everything really to help publishers get the most out of audio in terms of revenue, in terms of reaching consumers, in terms of their audio publishing.
Indeed, and you've grown so fast. I think that Bookwire has made enormous expansion.
We're growing, and because markets are growing and publishers want to do more in digital. So I think that's an exciting space.
It is indeed. Thank you for that, Mette. I think you're in Copenhagen, yes?
I am indeed in Copenhagen, yes.
Copenhagen, that's one of my former homes, I love it very much.
Yeah, you told me. Yeah. I'm even at the office, actually. So
there you go.
But yeah, my name is Mette Caserta, and I work as an internal business consultant at Saga. Until recently, I was leading our global expansion. And I've been with Saga since the beginning. I was part of the team that founded Saga. And maybe a few words about Saga for those of you out there that won't be familiar with us. Then we're an international publisher of ebooks and audiobooks, also print on demand and a few podcasts. We span more than 26 languages with our core business centered in Northern Europe, so in Denmark and Sweden. Some big part of our business is in Germany and bit in Holland, a bit in Norway, a bit in Poland, and rapidly expanding. We're one of I would say we're probably now the biggest single publisher of digital ebooks and audiobooks. We have more than 50,000 digital titles out in the market, and more than 20,000 of those are audiobooks. So you can say we're one of the publishers that have really embraced this audio boom that we're all talking about in these years. And we're still rapidly growing in terms of catalog and markets that we add. We built Saga on the mission that no book should go out of print. And at first, our main focus has been on the ebook, but as I will also be talking a bit about in my presentation, then our focus has in the last years switched over to audiobooks because it's really what we see driving the growth in the market. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from you because it is so impressive. You, like Ellen, who's about to join us here, are seated in that Nordic complex of such audio uptake. The world really has been led, I think, by your part of the world, same part of the world that Nathan's working with Beat Technology. And it's very exciting to see. Speaking of, Ellen, I think you're in Stockholm, are you?
I'm in Stockholm. Correct.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Very nice.
And tell us a little bit as if I think we all know Storytel, but please tell us anyway.
Of course. Yes. My name is Elin Torstensson, and I'm the regional manager for our Asia Pacific operations in Storytel. Yes, Storytel, very briefly, one of the world's leading audiobook and ebook streaming services, operations in 20 markets. And in Asia Pacific in particular that I'm overlooking growth and expansion within. We have operations in Korea, Singapore, India. We're opening up Thailand, and we have also announced going into Indonesia next year.
Boy, so Thailand is next, is it?
Thailand is next, yes.
That's fantastic. Some of us kind of chase each other about in journalism, trying to figure out which is the next country for Storytel to add. And Jonas is very...
It's the next in the Asia Pacific region. That is...
you see. There's always a little caveat.
We have announced, yes.
Yes, exactly. No, Jonas Tellender, your founding CEO, who's so terrific, is always very cagey with us and doesn't want to quite say one until it is one, which is smart, I understand. But we have a little game we play among ourselves, which is the next market for Storytel. Yeah, no, it's terrific. So thank you.
We have announced this to the market, so it's very much.
Right, so this one is known, yeah. In fact, I need to catch up on that one then. So thank you all for your introductions. Meta, could we start with you? Because I think that having heard you speak during our Bookwire All About Audio program that happened during the summer, I know that you're very good, as you were saying, in understanding the important presence of audio to publishers today. Can you expand on that and tell us your perspective on it?
Yes, indeed I can. Yeah, so I've been asked to open the ball here, I guess, at this panel with a little bit of unpacking of what it is we talk about when we talk about the audiobook as a new market opportunity. In the 7 years that I've been working in digital publishing, I've witnessed a massive transformation of the conception of what an audiobook is. And what new market opportunities this audiobook brings along with it as a format, which is what I shall dedicate this introduction to. Usually I bring up a bunch of graphs which shows market growth and so on, but I know that Elin will be talking about streaming later, so I think that you will probably be able to expand more in detail about that. But what I'm about to say is all based on data that I've collected from our Northern European markets in my time at Saga. And a lot of my observations are really part of global phenomena that I think we all experience to a bigger or lesser degree in all of the markets that we sit in. So roughly speaking, when I entered the business about 7 years ago, the audiobook was by many considered to be a secondary product to a physical book, if it even existed. At that time, everyone was talking about the ebook as the contester of the printed book, and audio was largely just ignored. There were many things in the way of the audiobook, I should say at this point. I mean, there were high production costs and the turnover per book, which didn't make return of investment ends meet. So let's say that the audiobook was at that point sort of doomed to a quiet life in download and on CDs. I guess this is in many ways comparable to the accessibility level that movies had when we were still buying a DVD or even on-demand video from our cable provider, which at some point was the pivot of the technology. But just as with movies, over the course of this past decade, this problem of accessibility has been solved also for the audiobook, namely with the entrance of the smartphone and providers such as Storytel, Ellen is from. It can now be reached, the audiobook, with a few clicks and played on the go directly from your pocket. And I think that this should be old news to everyone out there. Like, we all understand that one can narrate a story, record it, and for others to access on their smartphone. But what you may not have thought about then is that this completely alters the question of what is an audiobook. And furthermore, it raises the question, what is the market opportunity you need to see in this product's new accessibility? And the old book market finds itself in massive competition with an ever more crowded content industry, where the entry level of producers has become extremely low. And you have to think here about podcasts, you have to think about free online news, YouTube, just to name a few. And worse yet, consumers have an unlimited choice of free content to consume, basically. I think that in these years, many of us out there in the book industry are laying a little bit awake at night over these facts. It should be really clear, which I've made clear in presentations before, is that the competitor of the book is no longer just other books, but it's any other kind of content. And from my experience, the key to competing with this vast offering of content really goes through the audiobook. And it's because it's the only book format that can compete with the two central new developments in media consumption that we see in these years. We see easy accessibility, and we see the experience of free. We have to remember too that the book itself is a technology which, at the time of invention of the book, it was the easiest way to distribute information. But that edge of accessibility has now completely been bypassed by other technologies. Obviously, you may say that the book has other functions, also as an aesthetic object and so on. But in terms of entertainment, access to information and so on, the book is only one medium now where that problem can be solved. Many of these technologies that have bypassed the books are more user-friendly, and they may be accessed on the go and for a very, very low price, if not for free. The audiobook as a format can be consumed wherever, whenever, and it doesn't constrain the reader in terms of physical location. It can be listened to while driving, running, doing laundry, whatever, because we have the smartphone now. But then simply producing more audiobooks and selling them as a substitute or a new book is not necessarily just the answer for the publisher. It's only the first step. When we started Saga, our core markets were download driven, and the audiobook market was really growing very, very slowly. I should say that in Denmark, we don't have Audible, which of course in a market as the German market is a big driver for the audio also to function as download. So, but talking from one of our core market, Denmark, which is the one I've known the longest, it was growing very, very slowly because there was not a good user experience for it. So it was sort of like a chicken egg paradox. Like, people had no audiobook habit, so they didn't buy a lot of audiobooks, but then prices had to be higher for the audiobooks, which gave no incentive to buy, which meant that the market really wasn't driving any growth. So the other part is not, besides from producing audiobooks, is to make, or the other part in order to make the audiobook succeed is to embrace other sales models, because the audiobook and accessibility on your smartphone opens up to the sales model of flat rate subscription service. Selling your books on Netflix, like all you can read models, is really the way forward. When people can pick and choose whichever book they want for free, they want with the experience of free, because they just pay a monthly subscription, they read more because the risk of not liking a book is completely removed. They can simply just choose another one. And from the publisher's perspective, sure, you may get a little bit less payout per book, but the overall pie starts growing because people start developing the reading habit or the listening habit. And usually at this point, when I pull out all of these graphs from our core markets to show how massive this transformation is, because we're really seeing a double-digit growth year after year in the markets where streaming is embraced. And I'm talking about mainly streaming as natively book streaming services, not necessarily putting up your book on a platform which wasn't developed for book streaming. But I think that I'll leave that part again to Elin. But in conclusion, and if you take nothing else from what I've said from this introduction, which was almost a philosophical lesson on the book, then take this thought that the audiobook is not a narrated version of a physical book. It's a piece of content that in itself functions on completely different paradigms of distribution, of consumption patterns, of accessibility. And the educational level required to access it is quite different also from that of the printed book. So in other words, it's a completely different product and a new market for any publisher to really try to embrace and explore on its own premises. Because people don't read less these days, they read differently. And consumers out there, they want easy and they want freedom of choice. So in short, use the audiobook to make the book, the experience of a book more accessible, and also embrace flat rate services as a sales model. Because in every market that I have seen, the result is simply market growth and a healthier book market with bigger selection of books and also more revenue for the publishing industry. So those were my initial remarks, and I look so much forward to having this conversation.
This is excellent. You are so good at. I love the philosophical concept, because I think that so many publishers today are still catching up with what you're talking about. To me, the very key point is to think of the audiobook as its own entity, something that exists in its own right, and it has its own context and its own abilities to affect and drive its own marketing. As you're saying, if you can embrace flat rate, then you're actually entering an entirely different plane of marketplace activity. And
yeah,
I
you
think
all of a sudden get a spillover effect from podcasts becoming so popular. I mean, people have developed the listening habit in another place, and then they can directly transfer that onto your product, which means that you don't have readers sipping away from your product. You actually can gain readers from a completely different industry, and I think that is just a fantastic opportunity that we need to embrace.
No, it absolutely is. And I was saying to Claudia yesterday, we were doing another panel, we were chatting together, and I was saying that as you're getting at, one of the things I love is that it brings the art of publishing, the art of the book, into the same realm as all of the other electronic media and all of the digital entertainments. So that suddenly, as you're saying, it is just a simple thing to step right over to an audiobook from another entertainment, maybe a Netflix film, and maybe a piece of music,
It's a gateway into the market, and it's not I'm completely not advocating either, and we shouldn't talk too much now because the other we can also discuss later. But it's not I don't think that the audiobook will be what substitutes the physical book. No, I think actually we through the audiobook can create even readers for the physical book, like make it a transformation that goes that way as well. So we create readers by giving them access to books in the spaces that they find other pieces of content.
Right. And that's the most reassuring message we can send to publishers, is it's not as if we're creating something that's going to substitute for what you do normally. We're actually going to bring you more readers, and we're going to open the way as a gateway function. So it's a great point to get to. And thank you for that. In fact, it's a perfect lead into Ellen and what she knows from Storytel's experience. In terms of bringing this to so many people on such a wide scale. Ellen, speak to us about your perspective on this.
Yes, well, I mean, I can only agree to what Mette just shared with us. I mean, I think accessibility is extremely core to being able to cater to a digital customer today in a digital world, in a digital landscape. I mean, it's very clear from what we've seen in our growth in Storytel that customers seem to really like the aspect of being able to access a large library of content, audiobooks and ebooks in our case, through a very convenient way. That is core, and we see that in other industries as well. I mean, the access aspect over the ownership aspect and so on. But I also think it's not only like the accessibility and like the subscription and the streaming model. I mean, there's there's more reason to why people keep coming back month after month, year after year, subscribing to these services. And I mean, I can only speak for Storytel, but I think what's really core and what we are doing in our growth and our expansion is being very, very customer centric, very customer focused, and very relevant. And I think two ways of being relevant to our customers is, first of all, localization, really working with the local story, the local author, the local language that we know is what customers want from what we've seen so far in our expansion journey. I think 80 to 90% of the consumption that happen in Storytel is in the local language. So, for example, if you are a Swedish consumer, you tend to prefer Swedish stories and Swedish language consumption over English. And that is what we are trying to cater for when we grow and go into new markets, setting up a local team, working with the local publishers, the local authors, creating those stories, and then making them available through our platform. The second part of that is definitely personalization as well, being relevant in a really like personal angle. And I think that is the beauty also being a digital service, because when you keep coming back and consuming your content within a platform, we get to know you, and we get to know what books that you like. We get to understand what books that you don't like and that you don't want to listen to and consume. And that means that we can make great recommendations for you on a personalized level. And I mean, I can take myself, for example, when I enter a bookstore today, which I do often. I love to read physical books as well as audiobooks. I actually sometimes even do it both at the same time. I love putting on an audiobook and then reading at the same time. That is next level, but yes.
It's fantastic. I do that too. Yeah.
Also, no, but when I do that, enter a bookstore, I actually I turn to my app, my Storytel app, to find out recommendations that, based on my consumption habits and what it's clear that I enjoy, I can get recommendations on. I think that is also a really interesting element. And again, being in a digital product and a digital world, that we are able to deliver on, to our customers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that makes perfect sense. There's actually a compliment coming to Storytel that I heard the other day from Javier Celaya, the Spanish consultant we talk to so often. He was telling me that, Audible, as such a large subscription service for audiobooks, is known for its core subscription model, which is you get one audiobook per month. It's called the token that you buy for in our country at $14.95 US dollars. And for that, you get one. And so everybody works very hard to figure out what one book they can get. They won't buy a short book, even though it may be the book they want the most. But if it's only going to last 5 hours, they don't see it as being as valuable as War and Peace, which will take them 27 hours, right, to get through. And so they put their one token onto a book they don't even enjoy as much, perhaps. And it's an interesting problem that I think that model is having. But when they went to Spain, because Storytel had been in place for 3 years before they got there, they actually went in with an unlimited subscription service, which I think ties into what Meta is saying and to exactly what you're saying. The customer wanting choice and wanting range and not wanting to be limited and tightened. And I love what you're talking about, actually using Storytel's app for your choice making, for your discoverability, to walk into a store and find it, because it is a very good recommendation engine. And I think that's yet another way that what we're seeing is the infiltration of the digital knowledge that comes with the data level that this entire, including ebooks as well, that this entire level of operation offers us. Do you find that you're still working in Storytel to create a lot of your own original content? You're speaking of the local language being so important. I've heard that you go into some markets and there simply isn't enough, and that you have to actually begin to make very quickly some original content. Yes.
It really varies market to market. We have, very localized strategy for each market. But of course, what we always try to do is go in and work with the local publishers. That is the absolute first step. And then a complement to that could be working with originals. But we also know that is really time consuming, and it's a lot of effort. And actually, we would also like to be live in a market for some time to again work with the data, understanding what our customers in that market is actually looking for. So the starting point is always working with the stories that we have in each market with the local publishers and authors, and then start looking into if there's a need for originals. But that's, I would say, a bit further down the line.
Yeah, that of course is very good for the local publishers and the authors. You want that, and I think that's again one of the great things that Storytel is doing, is supporting those local publishing communities. Can you remind us of which markets in the Asian space, which is your main focus, are in fact using Storytel now? Where are you now?
In Asia Pacific, we are in Singapore.
Asia Pacific,
Yes, in Singapore, in Asia Pacific, we're in Singapore, in South Korea, in India, and as I said, Thailand we're launching, and we hope also announce that we're going into Indonesia next year.
Right, good. And can you tell me, is there a sense for, how would I say this? What special considerations do you have to take into account when you move into an Asian market? Do you find that the audio sensibility is in the same place that it might be in a Western market yet? Or is that at a different level now? How do you compare them?
That's a good question. I mean, this goes back again to being like localized. It's hard to say this is what we do in Asian markets, but we really look at each market in like a very specific way. Looking at what is the Indian customer want, what does the Singaporean customer want, and so on. Yes, I mean, it's definitely true. We know that audio as a format is not as big in some of these markets yet as it is in, for example, the US and the Nordics, but it's definitely growing. And that is what we want to tap into, being able to be a part of creating the local story for them in the markets that we enter, because we know that is the way you start discovering the books that you want to consume, and the books that is again relevant for you. I think relevance is so core to everything that we do within Storytel when going into a new market, really speaking to the local customer and their needs. And yes, that sometimes means that we develop products that is really catering for that need. So in India, for example, we have launched a product called Audiobooks, which is basically, if you don't want to have a full meal, which is our unlimited product with full range content, you can have a bite of it, so audio bites, and you can consume shorter content up to a certain amount before you have to pay. So it's actually a way of introducing audio to the market where you don't feel committed to maybe start paying for it yet. So that is one way. And then we also have a product called Select, which we only have, instead of offering all the languages that we have in the Indian languages, we're offering one language at a lower price point. And that is again driven by the consumers in that market and the need that we've seen there. So that is, I think, a big portion of my job is also going into understanding what do we need to make a perfect product market fit in this particular market. And that is everything from the features that we're offering within our app, the payment features, and of course the local story, and the collaborations with our publishers.
I think the Audio Bites idea sounds fascinating, and it's very smart. In a way, it parallels the sample chapter of an ebook, or even the single episode of a series on television that you might get through Netflix or through Hulu or Amazon Prime. It's very smart, and particularly in a market that may still have some resistance or may be unsure that this is something that they want to do. The more you can, we have found, and I think England's done this a great deal too. In the United States, we have services that put out stories, but in only 15-minute increments, because they've realized that people will get onto the subway and listen for exactly that long, and they'll buy the bite that fits the amount of time they have, which is pretty interesting. Exactly. And they're very practical about it, which makes perfect sense. And so that sounds like a very good way to go. And your expansion has taken, I keep picking on this, but I'm interested in this market, particularly in the Asian market. How long has it taken for Storytel to establish itself in this many countries in the Asian world?
We launched in India in end of 2017. And so and on that launch we had been working for some time on, because again we needed to really develop a large set of content before we launch, and that is actually the case in a lot of these markets. We have to come in and we have to start working closely with the publishers, understanding what content that we think will work, and then start producing it. So that of course takes time when we go after the local language and the local stories.
India was probably a good test case, though, because it is such a multilingual culture. I think many of the Asian cultures have many languages, and yet India has an enormous number of languages to take care of. So a smart way to go to walk into that. Good. Thank you for this. Let's move to Nathan now. And as we go, I love this process we're doing. We're slowly tying loose ends together. Nathan brings many things together in terms of what he's doing with Beat. Out of Norway is fascinating. Talk to us about this, Nathan. Tell us how it works.
So when I first came to Beat, I kind of loved it because I thought it was the missing link. So I had worked on the publisher side in audio. Right. Then I took the giant leap from London to Copenhagen. That's one leap. The other one was the fact that I jumped from a major publisher into the world of startups. So I joined a company called Mofibo, which was then later acquired by Storytel.
Just to explain, I think you were with Penguin originally, right? In London?
Penguin, then the merger into Penguin Random House, So right, Vidal and I worked together for a period of time. Yeah.
And didn't Jonas at Storytel buy Mofibo, or Mofibo, as you say?
That's correct. Yeah, he did that. And so it all kind of happened at an interesting pinnacle, right? So I like to think kind of prior to joining Beat, I had this kind of a good overview of what the publisher, agent, author requirements and thoughts were. Then a really good founding of kind of the startup world, the streaming platforms, etc. But when I came to sit with the founders of Beat, there was an interesting gap for me, because I had sat, particularly with a behemoth the size of Penguin Random House, always wondering why we didn't do it ourselves. And it's not a simple question to answer. But within Beat, sitting and listening to their story, here was a company that was empowering publishers to do it for themselves. So the potted history is Norway is a very small market, comparatively to the rest of Europe, geographically and population-wise. But it's a very literary market, largely dominated by 3 publishers. Storytel have a relationship with one of them, Cappelen and Dam. The other 2 publishers, numbers 1 and 2, Guttendal and Askehaug, simply wanted to find a different route. Let's put it that way. They didn't want to just always be, in order to grow their market, they didn't want to do sign away their terms, the rights to their audiobooks on terms that, they questioned. So they looked for a different route. They found Beat. The 2 publishing houses came together, created something called the Lydbok Forlag, which is the audiobook publisher, is what it translates as, and then decided to go it alone. And they created a brand themselves called Fable, or Fable in English, and really went for it. And this isn't unique. There are publishing houses around, particularly in Europe, that did this before. But I think in that market, there was a good set of circumstances, quite a complex book law. There's all sorts of things that came to a head well. And in a very short space of time, these publishers had themselves a streaming platform for audiobooks only. There was 50% market share, of course, with Storytel having the other half. And they threw all of their marketing might at this one platform. There's no Audible, there's no Amazon yet, although it's coming imminently, of course. So the circumstances kind of align themselves well. As as a pseudo Nordic, there's 3 other markets represented here, and it's probably no coincidence because it's so dominant as a format there. So that happened there. I came on to see how closely we could start to replicate that and what the appetite would be in other markets. And we've started to do pretty well, I think. We went, technically, we actually went to Germany next, but the one that got announced first was Denmark. So we'll speak about Denmark because Meta's here as well.
Right.
So we couldn't replicate perfectly, right? Because the publishing laws are different, circumstances are different, sometimes consumer habits are different. There's many things to consider. But in Denmark, we have partnered with the largest and oldest publisher there, called Gyldendal. No relation, as it transpires, to the Norwegian Gyldendal. And they, with two other Danish publishers, Gads and Modtryk, forgive my pronunciation, Meta, they have come on board to create their own platform called Chapter, which went live about a month ago. I'll talk more about that one in a second. In between time, we launched with Scooby in the German-speaking market, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland. Scooby was already an existing platform, the largest ebook subscription platform in the German-speaking world, and they wanted to add audio, and we had the experience to do that. So our kind of pitch to publishers, and publishers is our first route in, is to own the space yourselves, to consider it, to create a more level playing field. Lots of markets are dominated by one power, inevitably, right? Whether that's in ebook, in print, or audio. And in that can be a good thing, because these large players can come in and pave the way for a habit as well. And, there's a lot of marketing spend to create that awareness about a new kind of reading format. So that's a good thing. But the publishers, what we do is we give them the choice of what business model they want inside. So there's always questions about the remuneration models. How can they fairly remunerate their authors? We work with them with that, with a knowledge from a vast array of markets. And I've launched services in 12, even though Beat is only in 5 or 6 at the moment. So we bring on that knowledge to then advise them on what we think can work best. They're also in control of what the payment model for the consumer is. They're in control of the marketing of their own books. They make much better margins because they're not paying a middleman. And then we've touched on it a little bit. There's the data, right? And I'm sure Fidel, I know I've heard him speak so eloquently with the reams of data that Bookwire have. That's gold dust. And largely speaking, that's not forthcoming from the other platforms. So that, again, this is a sweeping statement, but largely a retailer, whether you're a traditional bookseller or a subscription platform, you impart information about units sold or a consumption number of some kind and the revenue. But there's everything else in there that the publishers really, really want to know about. So we give that to them. They're empowered to read it on live dashboards. And we also, because most publishing houses aren't backed, with a team of data analysts. So where needed, particularly at the start of the relationships, we do a lot of hand walking through that to find those stories in the data, to help them interpret what the trends mean. So there's the demographic information about their readers or their listeners, where they are, the times of day they read, how often they read, how quickly they read a book, their completion rates of books, what the actual content journey is. Like, are people concurrently listening to, or not literally concurrently, but at the same time, do they have like a nice piece of nonfiction, like a business title on the go, as well as, then maybe going to bed and listening to, some wonderful bit of fantasy, something else. But we can look at those trends as well. There's a million and one things, as well as the kind of traditional kind of carves on how often certain authors or narrators or titles are searched for, and all those kind of things. And then start to help those publishers learn how to act upon it. So that might be where to spend their marketing dollar, or actually what their acquisition strategy might be next time around. There's a million and one things. So that's essentially where we are. And that's our pitch. And I think we got something pretty different in the space. So we're live in the markets I've discussed. There's one more major European market going live of a similar ilk, working with major publishers. That will go live before Christmas. And then with another 4 going live in Q1 into Q2, all replicating a very similar space. So there's a distinct trend, and it's gone from being a nice to have to a need, I think. And yeah, and I think the more and more people are looking at that, you know, we just need a level playing field. That's what I feel, particularly in the UK. There's so little choice of where to listen. And Porter, you mentioned the original kind of Audible token-based model that exists. And yes, I completely agree with everything everyone said. And you said about, you know, particularly reaching new people, about having a flat rate model out there. Yeah. But there's a battleground happening right now. And God knows what's really going to unfold in 2021 with this switch of Audible's model. You know, whether other major players might be seeking to move, particularly into the US and the UK. And we've seen major publishers removing their content and not allowing their content onto flat rate services. And, you know, there's many theories as to why, but I think it's going to be a fascinating space. But to this point, I've always wondered why no one else just creates the same credit-based token model. If that's what's appropriate for your market, why not do the same? We've built it, you know, we're in conversations with people who are like, we could just do that. And some markets are still virginal, right? Where they're watching the trend globally of what's happening. So whether that be flat rate or still going, well, the US and the UK largely are still only doing this credit-based thing. What do we do? They can actually set the standard, is my feeling, right? You don't have to go down one route or the other, but it is a fine balance to consider the remuneration of the author and the publishing house versus actually reaching a huge target base who might already be, as Meta talked about, you know, they're consuming their music via Spotify and Deezer and all these other things, or they're on their Netflix and they want that flat rate. So then it might jar very awkwardly to then bring in a credit base, which is exactly, as you said, why Audible copied their Italian model, because they've been running flat rate in Italy very quietly for quite a while.
That's right. Yes, they're quiet about it.
Yeah, and let's see what they do next, right?
No, and I think this ties back over to something Meta was saying and something Ellen was saying, that I always say that the streamers have done us a great service in a way, because by putting into people's minds, this is how you consume entertainment, they're opening to us that ability to think ourselves in that way. And I honestly, I think that had Amazon been on top of Audible at the very beginning, it might have been a different launch, you know.
Maybe.
It may not have ever gone to the one token situation. It might have been different. The credit model might not have happened. So, yeah.
Simply, man, I think it's just about creating an opportunity for choice, right? So we look at the individual circumstances, exactly as Ellen was saying. These things don't just turn on overnight, right? There's a whole load of research, regardless what your business type is. If you're going to get it right, to go in with a lot of groundwork, to understand the market, certainly having local players, people on the ground to know it better than anyone else coming from the outside in. And one of the key factors, I think, as well, for flat rate working in particular markets, and, you know, given what I know from the music industry from way back, a lot like Latin America and parts of Eastern Europe in particular, and I'm not ruling out the US and UK too, piracy is a huge thing for us to consider, right? And accessibility. People they've got their device in their pocket for a low rate or relatively low rate. They can just access, doesn't matter whether they like it or not, they can move on. And it's never going to kill something as big as piracy, but it certainly starts to harness it a little bit better.
I like what you're saying. Can we pause right there for a moment? Because I was discussing this with Claudia yesterday too. What we've discovered is that the concept of abundance, making the content available and at a good rate, is actually the best way to start curbing piracy. Because so often people will go out and try to find something free because they simply can't find it another way. So this is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and I think you can couple that with, because it's not the cure, right? It's just a way of putting a leash on the dog a little bit, right, and managing it a little bit. But I think then you can take it a step further and actually think about how you create reach from that abundance theory as well. And another thing that I think the digital route for audio, and particularly with flat rate, is you can start to, as a publisher, you can start to think much more broadly about how you reach consumers. Not just because marketing, as you've already touched on, is so much easier with this digital file, right? And you can chop it up and do a million and one things with it. But you can create huge B2B opportunities too. You can take audiobooks into a space where you'd never be able to normally go. So as a publisher, you know, one thing you see a lot. And but this is a whole other conference, right? To talk about, partnering with telecoms companies, because you can suddenly reach, in theory, millions. They churn very quickly. We know that, but there's a reach there. But equally, I've done deals in the past with really odd things, with hindsight, where people want access to audiobooks. These could be working with banks, with insurance companies, where they want to provide content to their databases or their users as a form of loyalty or reward. Or you can go into places that are more cleanly fit with reading. So you could work with coffee chains or, societies of different kinds where people want to reach the audience with some form of gift. And I know publishers speak about these things a lot, and they have done bits and pieces, but it's never been a focus because they don't have that digital conduit to do it. And they, of course, they can do it with existing retailers. But again, for those who are starting to take that leap themselves, and we know firsthand, they now can go, oh, so you want all of our books, audiobooks, and we can do this? Here's our app, plug into this. Right. And so, that abundance theory you can apply in so many cases. Piracy is one, but actually creating new readers is eminently bigger, I think.
Exactly. And as we've been saying, it only creates more readership, even if it's coming through a company like Starbucks, which might want to have its own, in fact, does do a great deal of its own music offerings through its own operation. So I think more and more, that's exactly where things are headed. You're precisely right. And you're very on top of it. Vidal, let's bring you in. You've been very patiently listening to everyone.
It's been interesting.
Well, and having talked to you while we were in Frankfurt too, I know that you're very good at tying up where we are at the moment, because of course, all of what we're saying about audiobooks and about digital reading in general has been impacted by the pandemic. And you're very astute on what's happened during the pandemic. Talk to us a little bit about that and where the effect is there and what it's teaching us.
Yeah, well, I mean, so just to put a little bit of context, we have this kind of overview at Bookwire. So we distribute audiobooks from many, many different kinds of publishers in different markets. And I think we have around 70,000 titles that we distribute across different business models. So there are lots of kind of different trends that we see. But I mean, we saw a couple of clear trends in the German, Austria, Switzerland market, which in a way is like our Bookwire's first and still probably biggest market. Is that there was a lot of initial growth from the services that were the traditional download services, and I think a little bit that might have been, well, there were lots of specific campaigns on titles, I think, and lots of kind of a rush to really push that in anticipation of some kind of change of consumer behavior, and it did change consumer behavior because there were spikes and sales spikes, which then kind of settled back down again after that. So it kind of showed that there is a response, obviously, and there is this kind of dynamic that creates sales growth. But the other, I think, maybe more interesting point is that Bookwire also distributes audiobooks to the music streaming platforms. So we've talked about streaming platforms like Storytel or what Audible are doing in Spain, but there's another side to streaming, which doesn't even come from the audiobook industry, but is certainly influencing how consumers and millions and hundreds of millions of consumers around the world are thinking about listening, because we're all, most of us, speaking with these things in our ears. It's becoming more and more ubiquitous. And in Germany, there's been this phenomenon for the last kind of 7-8 years of audiobooks being distributed and discovered by consumers in music streaming services like Spotify and Deezer. So that's still in its kind of, there's still so much development in terms of the trajectory of that. But what we saw in this year is that there wasn't a huge jump like we saw with the download to own retailers, but month on month, like the slow but steady, giant, that consumption has just continued, and that's organic. That is just organic, and that is for us a proof point that we see being echoed by data coming out in markets, which is that new people are discovering audiobooks. The growth is not coming from the people who've known about audiobooks and have been using digital audiobooks for 10 years. That's that's already very established, and it's great that big markets like the US is still having healthy double-digit growth. We haven't even seen what the streaming services are really going to add to all of that. So that's what we saw initially, kind of related to COVID. And I mean, interestingly, today, Nielsen in the UK have just kind of announced some of the highlights from their annual book survey of audiobook consumption in the UK. And there's kind of healthy growth, as we've kind of now got used to, but it's good to see that the last year has still been like that. But what's interesting is that I think 2,000 consumers were asked, what was their primary motivation for listening to an audiobook within the last 6 months or a year. And I think within the top 2 or 3 answers was the change in situation due to lockdown situations. Right. So I think, but I think I wouldn't say to people in audiences who are trying to figure out how to get into the audiobook market, if you're a publisher, what happens next year, we don't know with COVID and how we're going to behave. But I think there is, this rise of digital that everyone, my colleagues here have spoken about so well already. This is the phenomenon that we are, living in. And I think, Mette, you said this in a previous presentation, which just resonates with me all the time. And you're saying to people, well, if you're thinking about whether streaming is in my market, well, it is. It just is, because people are streaming all kinds of content that's far removed from book content. But I think this is the opportunity that publishers who are skilled and are involved in the creation of stories for different kinds of consumers, there is this real opportunity through audiobooks, which still can be quite closely linked to a book, or maybe slightly less related, but still, if you're thinking about creating audio first content, which some of the bigger publishers, many publishers are kind of experimenting with, getting writers to write for audio. That's writing. That's still fantastic storytelling. I think I think that is the big kind of trend that's happening. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that I always feel is that, and so many markets are moving in different ways and developing, and we've talked a little bit about Spain, and I mean, that for us, that's a super exciting market. Spain and the whole of Latin America, we're talking about almost 500 million Spanish speakers. That market is growing, really, really rapidly. The catalog of available titles is still quite small, around 10,000 titles, maybe a little bit more. But I think publishers, there needs to be catalog. Just growth comes from the services, the end services that are actually engaging and recruiting customers and educating customers. But it also needs to come from content creators and publishers to actually invest and create the catalog. Because if you don't get the catalog growth, well, you put a cap on the growth, quite simply. If the choice isn't there, consumers don't find that first great read that they're looking for. And Ellen talked a lot about recommendation and customization. That's super important. But you can't customize unless you have the catalog to customize. So it's really, really important. And in all these markets, and it is a chicken and egg situation. It's all about how much publishers want to invest. So of course, we have to talk about profitability and viability. But I think audiobooks is not a short-term win. It's a long-term strategy. And I think publishers need to think about at least 2-3 years, which is really eminently possible, because the other thing to think about is this idea of front list and new titles and backlist. And that's not so important yet. It is important because people still know about the new books that they want, but not everyone is that kind of reader. There are different kinds of readers they want to be told a story. They're not book people who go into bookstores. And I think, again, I just see that as another opportunity for publishers. Another data point, sorry, Porter, that I just wanted to measure,
please,
to mention is that we conducted our own, or we worked with a market research company, and we actually wanted to do a little bit of research on the German digital market. Covered ebooks and audiobooks and podcasts, but talking about this kind of generational shift. The result of this survey was that this kind of the younger generation Z, huge amount, 43% of them prefer to stream audiobooks through music streaming services like Spotify. That's in Germany. and 70% prefer to stream or listen to podcasts through Spotify. So I think there are different kinds of audiences. So I think it's really important not just to think about one audiobook audience. It's fragmented and it's growing. And I think that there's even enough space in the market. The different services are not really cannibalizing each other. They're just expanding the market at the moment.
Right. I think we have a couple of minutes left, 2 or 3 minutes left. And what I might do, this is excellent what you've just been telling us, Vidal. Starting with you, I might walk around to each of you and very quickly ask, if you were talking to a new publisher, because as we're saying, some in the Asian group who are listening to us, and thank you for being with us, are new to approaching this whole way of thinking and working. If you were talking to somebody who publishes wonderful books and it's time to really get into an audio space more deeply and to really go into a digital format, what would be the thing that you would expect is the biggest hesitation? What makes a publisher go, I just don't know if I want to start into that? Is it expense? Is it technology? What gives people the biggest pause? Starting with you, Vidal.
Starting with me. I mean, I think it's a mixture. You know, we talk to publishers because we are service providers. So that's our role, is to try and support publishers. And I think there's a general hesitation around, our audio seems to be really its own thing. We don't understand the dynamics. We don't understand the costs. In a way, are the easy part to explain, because once you kind of do a rough costing of an audiobook production, that's what it is. But it's more about the trajectory. And I think publishers, they don't just want to dip their toe in the market and do something for 12 months and divert attention away from other things to turn to something else, which could be an opportunity. But they really want to think, well, we want to get it right, and we want to spend the next 3 years getting this right. And I think so. I would say it's a mixture of all those different dynamics. They just want to understand the connection between all those dynamics.
I love that point, and I'll go to Meta next, because I think what Vidal's just told us is both the bad and the good side of what you're telling us. We must think of audio as its own product, as its own content, as its own entity, and yet perhaps that would give a publisher a pause, because a publisher would say, "But this is an entity I don't know. This is a whole world of storytelling I'm not comfortable with." Right?
I would say that's probably the biggest problem, because what I see as the biggest hurdle in terms for publishers to enter this market is that you cannot do it just a little bit. I mean, you can, but you don't see much effect of it. I mean, publishing 10 audiobooks along with which is the strategy, I guess, of most major publishers, is that they publish it as a side product to the frontlist title that they put out, simply is not taking full advantage of this market. So, I mean, you need to build a scalable infrastructure in case you really want to make this succeed. And obviously that's a very large investment. But if I should say something to a publisher, I think that you don't have much of a choice in terms of exploring this market. Returning to actually the comment that you so kindly quoted me for, Vidal, that you're already competing with these products. You already have flat rate. You already have streaming in your market and so on. So you simply, to make the book accessible, which is the whole point also of my introduction, you need to enter this. You may not be able to do it by yourself, though. I mean, you may end up finding a partner. I mean, you may end up finding someone like us. I mean, Saga licensed a lot of titles from local publishers to help them along with this transition, but you don't have a choice in terms of exploring it.
I love this point. I call it Meta's audio imperative. we simply have to go there.
Yeah,
and it's absolutely right. It's exactly right. Ellen, give us your sense of what, particularly as you work in the Asian market, when you hear somebody a little bit timid about this, what do they say? What is their hesitation?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's a pretty. It's well known all over the world. I think that the consumer are going more digital. So I wouldn't say that that we see a lot of hesitation towards that this is the path.
Right.
I mean, very clear understanding from the data, looking at how audio is growing and so on. But I think like being new to audio and starting out that journey, that could be like a shift of focus that requires a lot of like work and dedicated staff working with that. I mean, finding the right narrator to the certain story, getting the right audio quality that we know that our consumers will require for it to be, I mean, a success in that market in order to really start building the audio market. I think that is where we can come in and really help, because we are also producing a lot of audiobooks in collaboration with the publishers to get started on that. And another thing, I mean, we haven't really talked a lot about marketing today. We focus on content, which is key. But then in order to grow a market, similar to what Vidal was talking about as well, like we need to get the best audiobooks out there. We need to get like the trending one, not just like the backlist titles. And we need to then market these to the consumers as well. And I think that is as well where we have an experience in like working with digital products, building an habit and start creating an audiobook market from scratch, which can also be, I mean, that is a challenge, and it requires quite a lot of marketing investment in a market as well. Starting
I think what you're saying.
So that's, yeah, exactly. So that's where we really love to partner with publishers and build that market together.
Exactly. I'm hearing partnership from a lot of you. And I think what we're talking about is the infrastructure. You actually need to help support each other, if you will, in this growing end of the market with infrastructure that you can share and that you can partner with. Lastly, you, Nathan, give us, you too are infrastructure. Let's face it, you're walking in with infrastructure for people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have to mirror everything that's already been said. I think the thing we come up against most, there is a lack of knowledge and skill set, certainly, which adds to this trepidation. And it's a very publishing-like thing, right? For people to sit on what they already know, right? And they'll just go, well, we can play it safe because we know how to sell print, and and those numbers are healthy, so we're going to stick with that. Right. We come up against that, but then when you start to talk about this about long-termism as opposed to short-term, and because they do know the consumption habits generally are out there, and it is happening whether they cover their eyes, their ears, and their mouth all at once, like the combined three wise monkeys. You got to remove that fear and give them some form of comfort there. And when we start to talk about long-termism, right, this isn't about. I think it's sensible for anyone if you're starting out to dip your toe, right. To get a feel firsthand for what it's like to even make a small selection of audiobooks yourselves. Profitability and cost, I know they're very clear, as Vidal said, but that will always come up as part of this chicken and egg situation for them. But if they don't start doing it, then someone else is going to, right? So whether, and we haven't talked about disintermediation today as well. And that sounds like such a negative phrase, but it's just, I don't mean it in that way, but it's, if the publisher doesn't execute the rights that they have, someone else is going to, and then they aren't going to profit from it, right? So they do have to invest a little bit upfront to grow, because if not, someone else is going to profit from where you could be longer term, because this is going to happen one way or the other. And I think Ellen's really valid with what she said about thinking about locally, and about really focusing on what that market needs for local language. So what I'm about to say isn't appropriate for every market, but I do think for publishers who are going to look at doing this themselves, but are worried about the volume of catalog they have or the investment they're willing to make themselves, I think foreign language content can be relevant in certain markets. So I know when we established Mofibo in Denmark at the time, there was literally nothing in the grand scheme of things. There was so few books recorded in Danish, but of course everyone in Denmark speaks better English than I do, right? So it would have been foolish not to put English catalog into Denmark to start with, to create that habit. And we're replicating this in many markets, not in Germany, because that's just not needed. But in some of the markets we'll be going into, certainly we'll replicate that, where you can add content in a foreign language. It might be English to start with, and then let publishers learn firsthand what that means in English, in local language. And then gradually over time, you toggle it. So you phase out the foreign language as the confidence grows in local language. And while other parties are, growing that market in terms of that habit around listening, then the whole ecosystem benefits.
I love that point. That's great, of toggling the languages as you go so that it develops toward the local language. It's fantastic. Very smart. This has been a terrific discussion. I'm sorry we don't have more time. It's been so interesting. I could go for another hour, but probably that's not wanted. So we will sign off here. I want to thank Nathan and Meta and Ellen and Vidal for all of your good comments. Thanks for being here with us today. And thanks to our audience for listening. Please join us at publishingperspectives.com. We're there often writing about these folks you see on your screen right now. And we hope you'll join us there. Have a good day or evening where you are. And thanks again for being with us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jay Zende, and I work with Audible in their India business, and I'm responsible for the content. I'm Director of Business Affairs at Audible. Now, audiobooks have existed in India in some shape or form for a long time. But let's take a look at the world picture. In the US, Deloitte had predicted in a recent survey that the market would grow by 25% to about $3.5 billion in 2020. Now, in a world where most media grows at about 4 or 5%, or 20% odd growth rate is very high. It is certainly the fastest growing segment of the book space. In ebooks, those are probably flat. P-books are also kind of flat or downward. Audiobooks, on the other hand, are showing robust growth from a fairly small base. Now, in the markets like the US and UK, audiobooks have been around for a long time. So I actually remember seeing somebody carrying around an actual suitcase full of audio cassettes for the first Harry Potter book, and it just, my eyes literally popped, I think, when I saw it. But that was the world then. And then when CDs came around, it became a little bit more compact because the capacity of CDs was a little bit more. But when you think about a book like any 200-page book would be typically about 7 hours, and capacity of a CD is about 70 minutes, you see how the numbers start adding up. And when you have anything which is a 400 or 500-page book, which is fairly common, you're talking about really large books. We actually have one very popular title, which is the collected works of Sherlock Holmes, and which I think runs to about 60 or 70 hours. So long books are very common, and obviously audiobooks in audio cassette become very untenable as it does in CD. What also makes it difficult, therefore, is the cost of those go up. So all of this meant that audiobooks were a very, almost something for the rich, if you like, or someone who was a real fan of the stuff. But that has changed drastically with the audiobooks going digital across the globe. It has helped the industry grow across the world. You don't need to ship large boxes of cassettes and CDs for a small amount of business in different countries. You can now do digital downloads. In fact, Audible launched the first digital download business back in 1998 when Don Katz started the company. And at that time, you could download 2 hours of audio content into a player and then listen to it. Of course, now it's become quite ordinary to have 100 or 200 audiobooks on your cell phone. My cell phone at least has probably something in that range. And it's possible to carry them around, and your entire book catalog can be on your phone at a given point in time. And that has been the biggest driver of change in audiobooks across the world. It has meant that almost every publisher, every major publisher, has their own audiobooks stream, at least in the US and UK and several other markets like Germany, France, etc. It has meant that there are several more players entering the field. The likes of a Storytel out of Sweden has become quite big. There are, of course, many other players coming out from China, from Spain, from Italy, France, Germany, and of course India, where we are seeing a lot of action happening as well. What has also happened is, because of all of this, people are no longer limited to doing the content of content that they want to deliver necessarily as a book, but they can deliver it in short episodes, what are popularly called podcasts. And with the likes of Serial, which moved away from the traditional interview type format and moved podcasts into a more true crime storytelling type of space. That space has once again exploded in a big way. So overall, a space which is growing very fast, not just in the US, but across multiple geographies. In China, it said that in 2017, about 23% of the population actually listened to an audiobook in 2017. So that's a fairly large chunk, and China has actually done some pretty amazing things in the consumption of audio content across the layers of population. What's kind of interesting also is that the usage occasions of audiobooks, the most common usage occasions are commute times. Many people have an average commute of 35 to 40 minutes each way, whether it's in a public transport or driving their own car. And that's the most common usage occasion for an audiobook, and that's been driving the growth. On average, an American audiobook consumer can consume about 15 to 17 audiobooks a year. There's some research that came out from Edison and the Audiobook Publishers Association recently. And a lot of people find that that's a great way to consume a book who don't otherwise like to read, who don't either like the concept of holding a book and sitting in one place, or just don't like reading for whatever reason. So many people say that, I think about 57%, again this is a stat I think that came from Edison, said that people finish many more books because they listen. Now, what's also happened is during the time of Corona, of course, people are no longer commuting as much, but they have a lot of extra time which they've been spending on consuming digital content. Sure, the OTT video platforms are very popular, but for a lot of people that becomes a bit of an overload. When you look at a screen for the whole day, there's only that many shows you can actually watch, and some people just like to listen. So that's seen a very good trend during the last few months. You might have seen the number of podcasts has gone up everywhere. The consumption of podcasts has gone up. Many large deals are happening in the space. Many more books are doing really well. The likes of Becoming, I think, by Michelle Obama, Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, and there's so many that are going into that space. Audible recently made a show called Sandman, which was a Neil Gaiman comic which was translated to audio, and which was very successful, got great reviews. So it's become a very mainstream sort of content consumption thing, and has become even more so in the times of Corona. Of course, there are some constraints about content creation, if you like. Some people who are writers, who are the more creative sorts, they struggle with having to sometimes write so well, but on the flip side, some of them feel like, hey, I have so much more time, so they are more productive. So there have been some gives and gets. Of course, production facilities have been slowing down because people can't really come to a studio. They're not happy to leave their home and come to a studio. So to some extent, production is slowing down. But a lot of people have set up home studios, and nowadays the quality of microphones that you can buy, or the recording equipment that you can buy off the shelf, is so good that many people are able to record excellent audiobooks sitting at home. In fact, Audible runs a platform called ACX, and over there it's just any individual can pick up an audiobook that they want to narrate and have it narrated in collaboration with the author, and many of them do it just sitting at home. In fact, this sort of home recording is a big driver of the podcasting business everywhere. In China, there have been individual teachers and professors who are recording content at home, and it's like 15-minute content, half-an-hour content, which they sell for a few yuan. And because it's really good quality content that helps people succeed in their profession, to be more personally effective in their relationships with their girlfriend, with their husband, with their boss, they're willing to pay money for it. So unlike the podcasting business in the US, which is predominantly advertising-led, there is a nice subscription-led audio podcast business that China has been able to create. So all of this has really, to a good degree, I'd say, started to pick up even in the COVID times. A lot of the content consumption, once again, research shows happens with the younger people as well, who are willing to experiment with new forms of content consumption. And for them, a book is not necessarily something that they have to read. They've been consuming a lot of content from that perspective. Even in a place like India, we are seeing that a very large number of new players is stepping into the market, right from, of course, Audible's own two services that we have there, which is in English, book-based, as well as a lot of original content that we have made, right from adapted stories done by the likes of Nawazuddin and Amitabh, for those of you who know major Bollywood actors of India, to the likes of Spotify making new stuff. There are local players like Cuckoo and Savan, which have emerged, and they've been making some really good stuff. Someone like a Nilesh Mishra, who's a really popular storyteller, and he's made his reputation by telling stories on radio, and now he's entering the digital space in a much bigger way. So there's a lot of growth that we are seeing, a lot of new interest in this medium across types of content. For some people, it is the exciting, intimate, whisper in my ear romance and intimate storytelling type of format. For some people, it is once again the amazing experience of a really spine-chilling horror story that works. For the others, it is the inspiration that comes from a good spiritual teacher or just a good motivational speaker. For me personally, I love listening to a good Haruki Murakami, or a really beautiful book in Hindi, which is the language that I speak most often, or a language called Marathi, which I grew up speaking. And in fact, the first content that I heard was in that language. So in a lot of South Asian countries, I think, where there's a lot of local content. In Korea, there's local language content. In many other countries, there's local language content that is popular. And the same is probably going to happen in the audio spoken space as well, where local language content will be at least as important as English language content.
Informasi terkini menjadi sumber referensi dan inspirasi di setiap aktivitas. Melalui news video portal, segala informasi dapat disajikan cepat, akurat, dan lengkap. Dengan kekuatan teknologi digital, Maidcom.id hadir dengan berita pilihan yang dikemas secara menarik. Maidcom.id, digitally inspire people.
Sudah 15 menit, masih kejebak macet.
Tenang. Daripada emosi, 15 menit Anda jadi lebih berharga kalau bersama saya.
15 Minutes, setiap Rabu, jam 6 sore lewat 45 menit. Mediaindonesia.com hadir dengan opini cerdas dan narasumber kredibel, mudah diakses, informasi berkualitas ada di genggaman Anda. Klik di browser Anda www.mediaindonesia.com dan temukan pandangan berbeda, karena fakta bisa sama, sudut pandang boleh beda. Mediaindonesia.com, views and news.
Dalam setiap denyut kota, saya selalu menjadi saksinya. Disiarkan lebih dari 20 televisi jaringan Jawpos Group. Jawpos TV paling Indonesia. Kebebasan pers dan gelombang era digital menghadirkan ribuan bahkan jutaan informasi dan data setiap harinya. Beragam data dan informasi berserak di berbagai tempat seiring dengan perubahan dunia yang bergerak begitu cepat. Media-media baru pun bermunculan, namun kualitas informasi seolah tak lagi menjadi prioritas. Bahkan, tak sedikit yang abai pada etika jurnalisme. Untuk menjawab tantangan itu, Kata Data hadir sejak April 2012 sebagai portal media di bidang ekonomi dan bisnis. Beragam sektor diulas mulai dari finansial, energi, pangan, hingga industri kreatif dan digital. Artikel mendalam dan komprehensif dengan sajian infografik yang menarik menjadi karakter utama dari Kata Data. Kata Data berikhtiar untuk terus menyajikan beragam informasi berkualitas untuk kemajuan negeri dan untuk kepentingan bisnis Anda. Kami percaya demokrasi yang sehat tumbuh dari kehadiran informasi dan data yang akurat.
Kalau bicara pakai data.
Hidup terlalu pendek untuk membiarkan pemikiran-pemikiranmu, ide-idemu terdiam begitu saja. Untuk berubah, kita perlu melangkah. Dan langkah itu lahir dari sebuah inspirasi. Republika, start moving.